Sister was taken 32 years ago. I chased the van for 3 blocks, memorized the license plate, and ran straight to the police station. The deputy chief on duty was sitting behind his desk eating chips. He barely looked at me. That's a domestic matter. Come back after 24 hours. I dropped to my knees and begged him to send officers. He slammed his coffee mug down. Make another scene and I'll lock you up. Then he had me thrown out. My sister's body was found beside a highway service road. She had jumped from the van and was dragged hundreds of feet. Her skull was shattered, and she had suffered severe beatings and sexual assault before she died. The deputy chief who refused to help was later promoted, eventually became deputy chief of the city department, and retired with full honors. No one ever asked him why he hadn't sent officers that day. Now I'm a cop. One afternoon, a woman in her 50s burst into the detective division, sobbing. My daughter's been taken by her ex-husband. Please, you need to send someone right now. I looked at her face. Something cold settled in my chest. Ma'am, we don't open cases on missing adults until the 24-hour mark. Go home and wait for our call. Her eyes widened. 24 hours? I nodded. That's the procedure. She had no idea that I had been waiting 32 years. To say those exact words. 24 hours? Are you kidding me? Denise Holt stared at me in disbelief. My daughter's been abducted. Her phone is dead. And the last location ping came from that abandoned brick factory on the east side. Her ex just got out of rehab. He's violent. He's beaten her before. It's obviously him. My voice remained calm. We can't open a missing adult case until the 24-hour mark unless there's clear evidence of abduction or physical violence. Clear evidence? Denise's voice rose. Her ex has a history of violence. He's got a drug record. Her phone suddenly goes dead. And her last location is at an abandoned factory. What more do you need? Go home and wait. Send someone. Go save her. I understand how you feel. She stared at me with disbelief. Then her desperation turned into anger. Who are you anyway? She stepped closer. Do you have any idea who my father is? There it was, the words I'd waited 32 years to hear. I know exactly who your father is. Then how dare you treat me like this? She lifted her chin. My father is Frank Holt, retired deputy chief of the city police department. One phone call from him, and you'll be out of that uniform. The room went quiet. I studied her face, the brow bone, the jawline, the slight upward tilt of her chin. She looked just like him. Miss Holt, I know who your father is. Close the incident log, but rules are rules. Go home, wait 24 hours, and I'll contact you if we have anything. Denise pulled out her phone. Dad, you need to come down here right now. Some cop is deliberately stonewalling me. I already told her who you are, and she doesn't care. She hung up and glared at me. Just wait. Less than an hour later, a cane tapped slowly down the hallway. A man in his 70s entered the detective division. His hair was completely white, his back slightly stooped, and his face covered with deep lines. But his eyes hadn't changed. That arrogant half-squint was exactly the same. Frank Holt. I would have recognized him anywhere, even after 32 years. Several younger officers instinctively stood. Good to see you, Chief Holt. Frank gave them a brief nod before looking at me. There was no recognition in his eyes. Of course there wasn't. He had no idea who I was. You're Quinn Avery. Chief Holt, don't call me Chief. I'm retired. He walked toward my desk. You're hiding behind the 24-hour rule, and refusing to send anyone. Sir, according to protocol. You think I don't know protocol? He cut me off. I spent my entire career on this force. I know the rules better than you ever will. His voice hardened. But rules don't bleed. People do. My granddaughter may have been taken by her violent, drug-addicted ex-husband. This is urgent. He leaned closer. You're a junior officer. Don't wave a technicality around like it gives you authority. Denise immediately added, Dad, she did it on purpose. I told her who you were, and she didn't even blink. Frank's expression darkened. Quinn, send officers out and find my granddaughter. I'll handle the situation according to regulations. Regulations. His voice rose. Regulations exist to serve people, not hold them hostage. You're a nobody in this department. Don't start thinking you're somebody. Nobody in the room spoke. One of my colleagues, Doug Ramsey, whispered, Quinn, just let it go. You don't want to cross a man like him. Kevin Torres nodded. It's one dispatch call. Why make this a fight? I ignored them. Frank took my silence as surrender. Kids who don't learn respect find out the hard way. He turned toward the door then paused. What's your name again? Quinn Avery. He repeated it. I'll remember that. The door closed behind him. Doug sighed. Just apologize later. He's retired, but he still has connections everywhere. I didn't do anything wrong. The next day, Denise went to the media. Local bloggers published headlines accusing me of refusing to save a missing woman. One post showed a photo of me sitting behind my desk. The comments exploded. Fire this cop. She doesn't deserve the badge. She's protecting the kidnapper. Find her address. By that afternoon, the story was spreading across multiple platforms. Captain Ray Garrett called me into his office. What? What the hell did you do? He dropped his phone onto the desk. The screen was filled with angry comments. The switchboard is being flooded. Chief Holt may be retired, but he spent his whole life in this department. He's got allies everywhere. I followed the rules. Rules. This isn't about rules. He slammed his hand against the desk. Stop being about rules. He slammed his hand against the desk. What do you gain from making an enemy out of him? I didn't make an enemy out of him. I looked him in the eye. I just didn't make an exception for him. Captain Garrett stared at me. Then he waved me off. Write your report, and stay away from the media. I returned to my desk. The next several days, the attacks only grew worse. People threatened to protest outside the precinct. Someone leaked my badge number. Another person claimed I'd been paid off by the missing woman's ex. My colleagues kept telling me the same thing. Just apologize. Just send the dispatch. Why destroy your career over this? I gave them the same answer every time. I didn't do anything wrong. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know why I was waiting. On the third day, a state news station sent a reporter to the precinct. They were going live. Officer Avery, Why did you refuse to send officers? Are you connected to Kyle Warren? Do you regret what you did? Microphones surrounded me in the hallway. Captain Garrett tried to push the reporters back. Back up. Officer Avery isn't taking questions. Female reporter shouted from the crowd. Did you deliberately delay the dispatch because of a personal grudge against former Chief Holt? The question was designed to destroy me. The live stream had already reached more than 1 million viewers. Chat filled with hatred. Fire her. Lock her up. She's working with the kidnapper. Dox her. I looked into the cameras. I will handle this according to regulations. Then I walked away. Inside the duty room, I locked the door. From my desk drawer, I took out a brown envelope. Inside was a single yellow sheet of paper, a dispatch log from 32 years ago. The handwriting was unmistakable, Frank Holtz. One line was written across the page, request denied. I stared at those words. Then I put the paper back just a little longer. The next day, Frank gave an interview. He looked into the camera like a wounded old man. Quinn is young. She doesn't understand how things work, he sighed. But what can I do? I'm retired now. Nobody listens to me anymore. The public sympathized with him. The pressure on the department became unbearable. Internal Affairs questioned me. Then the disciplinary board questioned me. Everyone asked the same thing. What exactly is your issue with Frank Holt? There's no issue. Then why refuse to make one simple exception? Captain Garrett pulled me aside. Quinn, would it kill you to send one patrol car? I shook my head. If I make an exception for Denise today, tomorrow someone else will ask why they don't get the same treatment. He frowned. You're willing to ruin your career over this? I've waited 32 years. He didn't understand. A few more days are nothing. Then finally, the missing woman was found. Denise's daughter was alive barely. She was curled up in a corner of the abandoned factory. She had 4 broken ribs, a torn ear and bruises covering almost her entire body. She had been unconscious for 2 days. The doctor said another day might have killed her. The news broke within minutes. Internet exploded. Quinn Avery should have sent officers. This is basically murder. Fire her. The story became national news. Someone leaked my home address. Threats flooded my phone. My colleagues stopped talking to me. Even Doug, who had defended me privately, looked frightened. Quinn, this has gone way too far. Captain Garrett called me into his office. He handed me a suspension notice. You're suspended indefinitely. I looked at the paper. I already submitted my own request. He stared at me. What are you trying to do? I folded my copy and put it in my pocket. There's an overdue debt. I stood. It's time to settle it. When I walked out of the precinct, reporters were waiting. Quinn, are you suspended? Do you have anything to say to the victim? Do you regret what happened? I stopped. For the first time, I looked directly into their cameras. Tomorrow 10 a.m. I smiled. State News live broadcast. I'll explain everything. Then I walked away. The next morning at 9:30, I arrived at the State News studio. 3 million people were already watching. The anchor sat across from me. Today we're joined by former Detective Quinn Avery, who was suspended over what has become known as the 24-hour rule incident. Turn toward me, Officer Avery. Is there anything you'd like to say? A brown envelope sat on the table between us. I placed one hand on it. Before I talk about myself, I want to ask everyone a question. The studio became silent. 32 years ago, a 9-year-old girl watched her sister get thrown into a van. The anchor's expression changed. That girl chased the van for 3 blocks. I continued. She memorized the license plate and ran to the police station. The live chat began slowing down. The deputy chief on duty was sitting behind his desk eating chips. He told the girl it was a domestic matter. He told her to come back after 24 hours. I opened the envelope. When she dropped to her knees and begged him to send officers, he threatened to lock her up. I paused. 3 days later, her sister's body was found beside a highway. The studio was completely silent now. She had jumped from the vehicle and been dragged hundreds of feet. Her skull was shattered. She had been beaten and sexually assaulted before she died. The anchor stared at me. I lifted the yellow dispatch log. The deputy chief who refused to help was later promoted. He eventually became deputy chief of the city department. I looked directly into the camera. He retired with full honors. No one ever asked him why he didn't send officers that day. My fingers tightened around the paper. That 9-year-old girl, I took a breath, was me. The studio went dead silent. I looked straight into the camera, and the man who told me to come back after 24 hours. I held up the dispatch log, was Frank Holt. The live broadcast continued, but for the first time in 32 years, the whole country was finally listening. The anchor slowly reached for the dispatch log. Are you saying this document was written by Frank Holt? Yes. And you were the child? Yes. The anchor looked genuinely shaken. Why didn't you tell anyone before this? I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Who would have believed me? I slid another document across the table. This is my sister's original missing person report. Then another. Her autopsy. Another. Her death certificate. The anchor's eyes widened. And this, I said, placing the final document on top, is the promotion record of Frank Holt. The camera zoomed in. The documents showed everything. The date my sister disappeared. The time I reported her kidnapping. The exact license plate I'd memorized. The deputy chief's name. And Frank Holt's signature beside the words. Request denied. Return after 24 hours. The anchor swallowed. Quinn, why did you repeat the same words to Denise Holt? I looked directly into the camera. Because I wanted Frank Holt to experience exactly what my family experienced. The anchor leaned forward. But her daughter nearly died. I know. And you deliberately waited? I followed the same rule he used on my sister. The room erupted online. Millions of comments appeared simultaneously. Then I added something nobody expected. I didn't know where Denise's daughter was. The anchor froze. What? I didn't know she was inside that factory. I didn't know she was alive. I didn't know her ex had taken her. I pointed toward the documents. What I knew was that Frank Holt had spent 32 years insisting that the rules mattered more than people. My voice hardened, so I gave him his own rules. The anchor stared at me. But if you were trying to expose him, why didn't you simply accuse him? Because accusations disappear. I tapped the dispatch log. Records don't. The broadcast instantly became the biggest story in the country. Within an hour, the state police announced an investigation into Frank Holt's handling of my sister's kidnapping. By noon, the police department suspended his pension review. By 3, investigators had located the original dispatch tapes. And then someone found something even worse. The recording. A 9-year-old girl's voice could be heard sobbing through static. Please. My sister was taken. I saw the van. I know the plate number. Then Frank Holt's younger voice answered. Go home. The recording continued. Please, sir. Please send someone. I said come back tomorrow. Then came the sound of my crying. She's going to die. Frank's voice became irritated. Make another scene and I'll lock you up. The recording ended. The entire country heard it. I sat alone in my apartment that night watching the news. Frank Holt had disappeared from public view. Denise had stopped giving interviews. Her daughter was still in intensive care. And my sister's name was trending for the first time in 32 years. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Quinn Avery? Yes. A man's voice came through. You don't know me. My name is Marcus Bell. I was a patrol officer 32 years ago. I sat upright. What do you want? I was the officer who received the dispatch call about your sister. My heart stopped. You were there? I was. Why didn't you come? There was a long pause. Because Frank ordered me not to. I gripped the phone. Did you know she was kidnapped? Yes. Did you know I was 9? Yes. Then why did you listen to him? His voice cracked. Because I was 24. He was my superior. I was scared. I closed my eyes. Do you still have anything from that night? Another pause. I have something you need to see. The next morning, Marcus met me at a diner outside the city. He looked nothing like the confident officers I'd known at the department. His hands trembled around his coffee cup. I kept this for 32 years. He pulled a small cassette from his coat. I stared at it. What is it? The original radio recording. I couldn't breathe. There's more. He nodded. After Frank ordered me to stand down, another officer tried to go anyway. Who? Marcus looked at me. Detective Walter Avery. My blood ran cold. My father's name. My father. Marcus nodded. He was your father's friend. He heard what happened and went looking for the van himself. I stared at him. But my father told us he wasn't allowed to work the case. He lied. Why? Marcus lowered his voice. Because Frank stopped him. I felt the room tilt. Why would Frank care so much about stopping my father? Marcus looked toward the window. Because your father had already discovered something. What? Marcus pushed the cassette toward me. He found the van. I stared at the tape. And he found the man driving it. Who? Marcus's face had gone pale. The man who abducted your sister wasn't. A stranger. He leaned across the table. He worked for Frank Holt. My fingers tightened around the cassette. Who was he? Marcus whispered the name. And suddenly, 32 years of unanswered questions had a face. A face I had seen countless times. A face that had been standing beside Frank Holt at police ceremonies. A face that had smiled for photographs while my family buried my sister. The man who abducted my sister hadn't vanished. He had spent the last 32 years working inside the police department. Marcus finally gave me the name. Gerald Voss. I knew him immediately. Retired detective. Frank Holt's closest friend. The man who had attended every police memorial ceremony for 30 years. The man who had even sent flowers to my family after my sister's funeral. I stared at Marcus. Where is he? Dead. When? 6 months ago. My stomach dropped. What did my father discover? Marcus handed me the cassette. Listen. I played it. Static. Then my father's voice. Frank, I know what you're doing. Frank answered coldly. You don't know anything. I know Gerald took the girl. Silence. Then Frank said 5 words. Then forget what you know. The recording ended. That was enough. State investigators raided Frank's home. They found old case files, photographs, and one horrifying folder labeled with my sister's name. Inside was the original investigation. Frank had deliberately buried it. But the biggest discovery was a handwritten note from Gerald. Frank promised she'd never be found. The case exploded. Frank Holt was arrested. His pension was revoked. His medals were stripped from the department's walls. And the department reopened every suspicious kidnapping case he'd supervised. Then investigators discovered something nobody expected. Gerald hadn't acted alone. Frank had been protecting an entire network of corrupt officers who helped abduct vulnerable women and girls, falsify reports, and bury evidence. My sister wasn't the only victim. There were 17 others. For 32 years, their families had been told the same thing. Wait. Come back tomorrow. Come back after 24 hours. I stood outside the courthouse as Frank was led inside in handcuffs. He stopped when he saw me. For the first time his eyes recognized me. You. I smiled. Yes. His face twisted with anger. You ruined everything. No. I stepped closer. You did that 32 years ago. He stared at me. You were just a child. And you were supposed to protect me. Frank looked away. The courtroom doors closed behind him. Months later, the trial began. The recordings were played. The documents were presented. Former officers testified. Families came forward. And one by one, Frank's carefully polished legacy collapsed. He was convicted on multiple charges related to obstruction, conspiracy, and the cover-up of the kidnapping investigations. When the judge sentenced him, Frank was 80 years old. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. Afterward, I visited my sister's grave. I placed the original dispatch log beside the flowers. For 32 years, that piece of paper had represented everything I hated. Now it represented something else. Proof. My sister had never been forgotten. Her case had simply been buried by people who thought nobody would ever dig it back up. I stood there for a while. Then I whispered, you got your 24 hours. I picked up the paper, and I got my answer. Then I walked away. This time, nobody told me to come back tomorrow. 3 months after Frank Holt was sentenced, I thought the case was over. I was wrong. One morning, an envelope appeared on my desk. No return address. Inside was a photograph. My sister. Alive. The picture was dated 2 weeks after her supposed death. My hands began shaking. I flipped it over. Someone had written 4 words. Frank wasn't the worst. I immediately called state investigations. They arrived within 20 minutes. The photograph was examined, dated, and authenticated. It wasn't fake. My sister had survived the fall from the van. Someone had taken her from the highway afterward. Someone had kept her alive. The original autopsy had been falsified. The body identified as my sister's hadn't been hers. For 32 years, my family had buried the wrong girl. I stared at the photograph again. My sister was sitting in a chair. Older than the 9-year-old girl I remembered, but unmistakably her. And behind her stood a man. The investigators enlarged the image. I recognized him immediately. Gerald Voss. But Gerald had supposedly died 6 months earlier. Then we noticed something else. Behind him was a building. An old police training facility that had been abandoned decades ago. We searched the property. Buried beneath the floorboards, investigators found dozens of photographs. Victims, dates, names, and one final photograph. My sister. Taken only 8 months earlier. She was alive. The investigation exploded all over again. We traced the photograph to a private nursing facility. My sister had been living there under another name. When I walked into her room, she looked up. She was 61 years old. Gray hair, thin face. But those eyes. Those were the same eyes I remembered from when I was 9. She stared at me for several seconds. Then she whispered my childhood nickname. I broke down. I grabbed her hand. You're alive. She squeezed my fingers. I knew you'd come. I couldn't speak. She looked toward the door. Quinn, Frank wasn't the one who took me. Who was? Her expression changed. The man who ordered him. I froze. Who? She whispered the name. And this time, even I wasn't prepared for the answer. Your father. My entire body went numb. My father hadn't been Frank's victim. He had been part of the operation. And suddenly, the entire story I'd believed for 32 years began falling apart. My sister's accusation destroyed everything I believed. My father had supposedly spent 32 years searching for her. He had actually known she was alive. Investigators reopened his old records and found payments from Frank Holt, Gerald Voss, and several other officers. My father had been part of the network. He had helped arrange my sister's kidnapping after discovering she had witnessed something she wasn't supposed to see. Then he had staged her death to silence the investigation. But he hadn't expected me to chase the van. He hadn't expected me to memorize the plate. And he certainly hadn't expected me to become a police officer. My sister told investigators everything. She had been moved between safe houses for decades, threatened whenever she tried to escape. Eventually, Gerald became careless. He left evidence behind. My sister secretly collected it, and sent the photograph that exposed everything. Within weeks, the remaining conspirators were arrested. Some were already dead. Others were sentenced to decades in prison. My father was arrested last. When I saw him in court, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. Quinn, I can explain. I shook my head. You had 32 years. He lowered his head. You were just a child. So was she. He had nothing to say. The judge sentenced him to life in prison. Frank Holt died behind bars 2 years later. His name was removed from every police honor roll. The department formally apologized to the families of all 18 victims. And my sister? She came home. She needed years of therapy and medical treatment, but she finally had her own bedroom, her own clothes, her own name. One evening, we sat together looking through old family photographs. She pointed to one. That was the last picture before they took me. I looked at the little girl beside her, me, 9 years old, holding her hand. I smiled sadly. You know what I remember most? What? You telling me not to let go. She squeezed my hand. You didn't. I shook my head. No, I didn't. 32 years earlier, I had chased a van because I refused to accept that my sister was simply gone. 32 years later, I had finally brought her home. And the 24-hour rule that once helped bury her story became the very thing that exposed the people who had hidden it. The last time I visited the police station, I walked past the dispatch desk. A new officer was sitting there. A frightened teenage girl stood in front of him, desperately reporting that her mother hadn't come home. The officer immediately stood. Tell me everything. I stopped in the hallway. Then I smiled. That was the moment I knew the cycle had finally ended. The investigation uncovered the full truth. Frank Holt, Gerald Voss, and several officers had operated a kidnapping network for decades, while my father had helped cover it up. My sister had survived her supposed death, and been hidden under another name for 32 years. Once she testified, everything collapsed. The remaining officers were arrested. Frank died in prison. My father was sentenced to life. The police department stripped Frank's name from every honor, and reopened the cases of 17 other victims. My sister came home. She needed years of treatment, but she finally had her freedom. One evening, we sat together looking through our childhood photographs. She pointed at one. You were holding my hand. I smiled. You told me never to let go. She squeezed my hand. You didn't. 32 years earlier, I had chased a van because I refused to lose my sister. 32 years later, I brought her home. And the cruelest rule I'd ever heard became the evidence that finally destroyed the people who had used it to hide their crimes. I returned to work months later. A teenage girl was standing at the front desk, terrified, reporting her mother missing. The officer immediately stood. Tell me everything. I watched from the hallway. Then I smiled. Because this time, someone was listening. The investigation uncovered the full truth. Frank Holt had helped cover up my sister's kidnapping, but he wasn't the mastermind. My father was. He had arranged the kidnapping after my sister witnessed something incriminating. Frank and Gerald Voss helped bury the evidence, falsify the death investigation, and convince everyone she was dead. My sister had actually survived. She had spent 32 years being moved between safe houses, terrified that escaping would get my family killed. Eventually Gerald made a mistake. My sister secretly gathered evidence and arranged for the photograph to reach me. The arrest came quickly. Frank was convicted. The corrupt officers who had helped him were convicted. And finally, my father was arrested. When I saw him in court he cried, "Quinn, I'm sorry." I stared at him. "You had 32 years to be sorry." He lowered his head. My sister testified. The evidence was overwhelming. My father received a life sentence. Frank died in prison before his appeal could be heard. The department stripped his name from every award and memorial. Years of buried kidnapping cases were reopened. Families finally received answers. And my sister came home. She was no longer the little girl I remembered, but she still squeezed my hand the same way she had before she disappeared. One evening, she asked me, "Do you still remember chasing that van?" "Every second." "You never gave up." I smiled. I promised I wouldn't. 32 years earlier, nobody listened when a little girl begged the police to save her sister. 32 years later, the entire country listened. The 24-hour rule had once been used to delay justice. This time the truth didn't wait. And neither did I. 10 years later, I was standing in front of a classroom full of new police recruits. On the wall behind me was a simple sentence. When someone says they're in danger, listen. I wasn't there as a detective anymore. I was an instructor. After everything that happened, I couldn't stay on the streets forever. I wanted to make sure no frightened family ever heard the words that had haunted mine. Don't make people prove they're worth saving, I told the recruits. Your job is to respond when they call. After class, I drove to my sister's house. She was sitting on the porch, laughing with her grandchildren. Sometimes I still found it unbelievable. For 32 years, I had imagined my sister as a 9-year-old girl forever trapped inside my memory. Now she was an old woman arguing with her grandchildren about eating too much candy. She caught me staring. "What?" "Nothing." "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "Looking at me like you're making sure I'm real." I laughed. "Maybe I am." She smiled. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand. The same gesture. The same hand. Alive. That night, I visited my sister's grave. The grave marker had been removed years earlier after the investigation proved she was never the person buried there. There was nothing left except an empty patch of earth. I stood there for a moment anyway. Then I turned around. My sister was waiting beside the car. "Ready?" I smiled. "Ready." We drove home together. For 32 years, I had been chasing the past. Now I finally had somewhere else to go. Forward.